Welcome back to this peaceful story time, wherever you are in the world. Tonight, you're not just hearing a Bible story, you're stepping into the silence of a small room in Nazareth, lit only by candlelight, where a man sits alone. A man chosen to protect the Savior of the world, yet barely speaks a word in Scripture. This from the Sleep Carpenter. A night in taunted Joseph's thoughts, a gentle, immersive retelling meant to slow your mind, soften your breath, and settle your spirit as you drift into sleep. But this isn't a story of action. This is a story of obedience, of doubt, of dreams, of a man wrestling with destiny in the dark. And tonight, you'll hear what the Scriptures never said, but what his heart may have whispered. Before we begin, drop a comment. What time is it where you're listening from? I love seeing how this little pocket of peace stretches across the globe. Now find something warm. Let your shoulders relax. Let the weight of the day fall off your chest, and prepare to walk into a night where nothing was loud, but everything was changing. Let's begin. Joseph listened in silence, his mind reeling. He watched her face as she spoke, this girl he had known since childhood, whose laughter he cherished, whose gentle spirit had captured his heart. She wasn't lying. He knew Mary well enough to see that she believed every word she was saying. But believing that she believed it, and believing it himself, those were two different things entirely. When she finished speaking, the garden fell silent, except for the buzz of bees among the herbs and the distant sound of children playing in the street. Mary stood before him, her hands folded, waiting for his response, waiting for him to either embrace this impossible reality or walk away from her forever. Joseph opened his mouth, then closed it again. What words were adequate for such a moment? What response could possibly bridge the gap between the ordinary life he had planned and the extraordinary claim she had just made? He began, then stopped. I need to think, Mary. I need to pray. She nodded, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. I understand. That was the last time they had spoken alone, the last time before everything changed. Feel the quiet settling around you as we return to Joseph in his workshop, wrestling with thoughts too large for any human heart to hold easily. Joseph moves away from the window and lights an oil lamp, its flame casting dancing shadows on the workshop walls. The familiar tools of his trade seem to watch him, chisels and saws, measuring squares and marking knives, each one a connection to the generations of craftsmen who came before him. He has always found peace in this place. When his father died too young, leaving him to provide for his mother and younger siblings, it was here among the wood and tools that he learned to trust in God's provision. When village gossips whispered about his family's struggles, it was here that he found the strength to keep working, keep believing, keep moving forward. But tonight, the workshop feels different. The tools seem like artifacts from a simpler time, when the biggest decision he faced was choosing between oak and cedar for a customer's table. He sits on a wooden stool, his work-roughened hands clasped before him. The unfinished cradle rests nearby, a constant reminder of the choice he made 3 months ago, the choice to stay, to believe, to take Mary as his wife, despite what others would say. The decision hadn't come easily. For days after Mary's revelation, Joseph had walked the hills outside Nazareth, turning her words over in his mind like a puzzle he couldn't solve. An angel, a virgin birth, the Messiah. Each piece seemed impossible on its own, and together they formed a picture that challenged everything he thought he knew about God's ways. The practical part of his mind, the part that measured wood twice before cutting, that planned each joint before reaching for his tools, wrestled with the implications. If Mary was telling the truth, then the child she carried was holy, set apart, the fulfillment of centuries of prophecy. But if she wasn't, Joseph closes his eyes, remembering the agony of those days. He had loved Mary since they were children, playing in the same dusty streets. Her kindness to the village widows, her gentle way with the younger children, the light in her eyes when she spoke of God's faithfulness, these things had drawn him to her long before their families arranged their betrothal. Could such a person lie about something so sacred? Could someone whose very presence seemed to bring peace be capable of such deception? But then again, could he trust his heart when it came to Mary? Love, he knew, could make a man see things that weren't there, believe things that couldn't be true. The village elders would have had a simple answer. If she was with child and they weren't yet married, she had been unfaithful. The law was clear about such things. He could divorce her quietly, spare her the public shame, but divorce her nonetheless. It would be the practical thing, the expected thing, the safe thing. Let the gentle rhythm of Joseph's breathing guide your own as we enter the most sacred moment of his story, the night when heaven spoke in dreams. Joseph shifts on his stool. The memory of that night, as vivid now as it was 3 months ago. He had finally made his decision. After a week of sleepless nights and countless prayers that seemed to bounce off the stone walls of his small room, he had chosen what seemed like the only reasonable path forward. He would divorce Mary quietly. It broke his heart, felt like tearing away a part of his soul, but he couldn't see another way. He couldn't marry a woman carrying another man's child, no matter how much he loved her. And he couldn't subject her to the public accusations and stone-throwing that would come if he exposed her condition openly. A quiet divorce would allow them both to move forward with some dignity intact. He had gone to bed that night with the weight of his decision settling like a stone in his chest. Tomorrow he would speak to the village elders. Tomorrow he would set in motion the end of everything he had hoped for. But tomorrow never came, at least not the tomorrow he had planned. Joseph stands and walks to the window again, looking up at the same stars that had watched over him that night. The memory unfolds in his mind like a scroll being opened, each detail crisp and clear. He had been sleeping deeply, the exhausted sleep of someone who has wrestled with an impossible choice and finally surrendered to what seems inevitable. But then, gradually, he became aware of a presence in the room. Not a sound or a movement, but something deeper, a sense that he was no longer alone. Light began to fill the small space, no, the harsh, blinding light he might have expected, but something warm and golden, like the first rays of dawn, but softer, gentler. The light seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling every corner of the room, but somehow not waking his younger brother, who slept on a mat nearby. And then the angel spoke. Not with a voice that boomed like thunder or whispered like wind, but with words that seemed to form directly in Joseph's mind, bypassing his ears entirely. The message was simple, direct, impossible to misunderstand. Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. The words hung in the air, or perhaps in his heart, with the weight of absolute truth. This wasn't a suggestion or a request. It was a divine appointment, a calling, a destiny he had never imagined, but could no longer escape. Joseph had tried to speak, to ask the 1,000 questions that tumbled through his mind, but the presence was already fading. The light dimmed gradually, like the sun setting in reverse, until he was alone again in the darkness of his room. But not truly alone. Something had changed in that moment, not just in his circumstances, but in his very soul. The doubt that had plagued him for days was gone, replaced by a certainty that defied logic, but felt more real than anything he had ever experienced. Mary had been telling the truth, the impossible was happening, and he, Joseph the carpenter, had been chosen to play a part in God's greatest story. Feel the peace that comes from surrender as we witness Joseph's transformation from doubt to faith. Joseph turns from the window and picks up a small piece of cedar, running his thumb along its smooth surface. Even now, months later, he marvels at how quickly everything changed after that night. The next morning, he had risen before dawn and walked straight to Mary's house. Her mother answered his knock. Her expression guarded word of Mary's condition had begun to spread through the village's network of whispered conversations and meaningful glances. "Is Mary here?" he had asked, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions in his chest. "Joseph," her mother had said carefully, "perhaps it would be better if—" "Please," he interrupted gently. "I need to speak with her." Mary appeared in the doorway behind her mother, her face pale but resolute. She looked at him with eyes that held both hope and resignation, as if she was prepared for whatever he might say, but still dared to hope for grace. "Mary," he said, loud enough for her mother to hear, loud enough to make his intentions clear, "I've come to ask when you would like to have our wedding." The change in her expression was like watching the sun rise slowly. Then all at once, relief and joy replacing the fear and uncertainty she had carried for so long. Her mother gasped, her hand flying to her heart. "Joseph," Mary whispered, "are you certain?" He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. They were small and soft, but he could feel the strength in them, the same strength that had said yes to an angel's impossible request. "I'm certain," he said. "God has a plan, Mary, and somehow, incredibly, he wants us to be part of it." The wedding had been small, hastily arranged, attended by family and a few close friends who chose to celebrate rather than whisper. But Joseph remembered every moment of it, the way Mary's eyes sparkled when she looked at him across the simple ceremony, the way her voice shook with emotion when she spoke her vows, the way her hand felt in his when they were finally, truly married. Their wedding night had been chaste here, mutual understanding that this child Mary carried was sacred, set apart, not to be confused with the ordinary intimacies of marriage. There would be time for that later, after the baby was born, after their part in this divine drama had been fulfilled. But they had held each other that night and talked in whispers about the future they could hardly imagine. What would it be like to raise the Messiah? How do you discipline a child who is also the Son of God? What lullabies do you sing to the one who will save the world? They had laughed at the absurdity of it all, and cried at the magnitude of it, and finally fallen asleep in each other's arms, trusting that the God who had brought them this far would guide them through whatever came next. Let your mind rest as we explore the quiet months that followed, when the extraordinary hid behind the ordinary facade of daily life. Joseph sets down the piece of cedar and moves to the cradle, running his hand along its smooth rails. The months since their wedding have been a study in contrasts outwardly, the ordinary challenges of a young married couple starting their life together, but underneath, the constant awareness that they are part of something far greater than themselves. Mary's pregnancy has progressed normally, or as normally as any pregnancy can, when the child being carried is the Son of the Most High. She has experienced the usual discomforts, morning sickness that kept her from the kitchen for weeks, backaches that make her walk more slowly, the fatigue that sends her to bed earlier each night. But there have been times when Joseph has caught her with her hand on her belly and a look of wonder on her face, as if she's feeling something more than the ordinary movements of a growing child. Times when she's hummed lullabies in languages she doesn't know, or spoken blessings in words that seem to come from somewhere beyond her own understanding.